a better future for their children?
No, absolutely not. I'm actually a component for reparations too, by the way. I forgot to add that. And it's funny because you mentioned the whole Montreal connection and everything else with slavery. But as I said, I'm a component of reparations, and we happen to know at least over 20 major corporations globally that has benefited directly from the transatlantic slave trade. And one of them would be the Canadian National Railway Company that's based in Montreal and Quebec, Canada. So you sure your ancestors had nothing to do directly with slavery? I would question that. Again, because again, this was a global thing. This wasn't just this country. I'm sure you well studied enough to understand how the transatlantic slave trade worked and how many countries was involved with this. And when we talk in reparations, when I talk reparations, I'm talking globally, but mainly in this country. But again, I can name you a bunch of corporations that directly benefited from slavery, major corporations in this country and globally all the way around. So, like I said, if I dug deep enough in your ancestry, I'm sure I could find some kind of connection with your ancestors in slavery. I'm positive.
Well, you can. There are books written on the Gariepy. It's something that has been studied a lot. So I'm reporting what I know from this genealogy. You are free to do your own research. But I don't think that your comment there addresses my point. You talk about exploitation. It's essentially a Marxist argument. It's like white people would have benefited from slavery, therefore reparations. But this does not address my point. My point is there is a better lifestyle and a better way of life for Black people in America today than there is in Botswana. I don't think you can deny this. Do you deny that the Black population of the U.S. are currently in a better condition, both at the IQ, educational, literacy, economic performance level, and quality of life than their African peers?
No, because a lot of these stats are based on when they classify African Americans in this country, they don't distinguish between the actual descendants of African slaves opposed to the immigrants that came over here. That's probably only like second generation away removed from Africa or whatever country they come from. A lot of these people that benefit on high on education are people that came over here from other countries, immigrants, black, but they also they're immigrants, and they come over here and they get their little scholarships and everything, and they funds and everything. They able to go through school, and they able to get the economical backing to be able to go through all this. While people like myself, who's born here, are unable to get these same resources and everything in order to get further in their education. So a lot of these stats and numbers are skewed to make it seem one way when it's really another.
Well, I don't think the skewing is enormous because there's more than 80% of the Black population of the U.S. who are direct descendants, whose ancestors are majority slaves in the past. And so whatever effect you mentioned there would be small. But let's go down to it. Let's go to the poorest Black populations in America. I claim that they live with civil rights that are superior to those who are in Botswana or in other African countries. I mean, even the average population in the U.S., their IQ for Black people is around 85. We're talking about 10 to 20 points higher than most African countries that are sub-Saharan. And so we're talking about a huge advantage. And there's also race mixing opportunities. For example, the Black population of America today in the U.S., they are the whitest persons genetically. They are the whitest Black persons on planet Earth. They have up to 17% on average of white genes that they have in their own descent. And so there have been opportunities to access a gene pool of people who have changed their characteristics. And today they find themselves with probably the highest average IQ in all Black populations across the planet, down to 20 points of advantage on some of their peers, like Botswana is at 70, for example.
Yeah. Well, let me put this out there. You mentioned a lot about mixed blacks and everything else and white. I don't consider mixed people to be black myself. Let me just put that out there. So when you're throwing these mixed people in with black people, I question that because again, these are mixed people. They have one black parent, one white parent, or Asian parent, or whatever, Tiano Indian parent, whatever the case may be, but they automatically get thrown in the black category, and I don't subscribe to that. That's a one drop rule mindset that I actually fight against, because these people could easily be considered white and not black. So again, these numbers are skewed.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know that there are remaining per black populations in America. People get their 23andMe test and they realize, oh yeah, I have 5% white European genes, 10, 15%. That's more likely what they're going to find. I mean, this is a question of identity, and I would not deny your right to identify. If you say to me a per black person is someone who can trace 100% of their genes to Africa, I'm absolutely fine with it. The fact is there are people who have explored other branches, and they are often categorized as black in the US. They have decided to race mix a little bit. There were lots of love stories between slave owners and slaves, and it led to babies.
Are you kidding me? Love stories?
Romantic story. Yeah.
Those are rapes.
What?
That what you call that a love story? Rapes? Really? Really? That's what you calling that?
Well,
what happened in
I mean, there's been a lot of consensual sex happening between.
Let's not get this twisted. What happened out in slavery was not jungle fever. This was not what's going on today in this country where we're seeing all this race mixing and everything else going on. No, this was rapes. All right, this was what was happening. These were overseers and slave masters sitting up here taking our women's virginity, taking. Listen, we're not even gonna play this game. Is this guy serious? Love stories?
Well, ahead, do you have evidence that the entirety of race mixing events in the U.S. for the last 200 years were all non-consensual?
I'm saying what happened in slavery was not consensual. Yes, that would be deemed rape today. Yes, especially if you're looking under what they consider rape under this rape culture. You're going to tell me that wouldn't be considered rape under what happened under slavery? You want to tell me them? You want to tell me those women had the option to say no? They could have told the slave master no. Could they have told that overseer no? That was rape.
I think that in many cases they could say no. I think that there is some women who were part of the slave population who were doing their work as slaves, of course, which, as pointed out by Alltype on YouTube, by the way, slave status in the U.S. is very similar to serf status in the monarchy. And so white people have also been deprived of rights in the past, and we kind of deal with it by saying, okay, it was a different world. But of course there was consent, there was option. A woman could have chosen to try to charm her slave owner, or she could have decided not to charm him. I don't think that all of the sex that happened between blacks and whites in America was a rape.
Every single thing that happened in slavery, deeming as far as mixed children going on, happened through rape. Again, our women were not in any position of power. They was not in a position where they could say no. If the slave masters and overseers wanted our women, that's what was going to happen. And they would kill their husbands in order to have them if they had to. They would have them. And there was nothing the slaves can do. I don't even know what you're talking about right now. You're talking this whole promiscuous slave narrative crap that I don't subscribe to at all.
Well, I think it's essentially you have an ideological opposition. You say everything that happens under this condition, I will call it a rape. Of course, I have a more subtle understanding of it, and I don't think that you have brought evidence that convinces me that it was all rape. I don't deny that there were rapes. There were rapes, of course, in slavery, just like there was in society, and there is still in society today. But to designate an entire population and say all of the sex that happened there was all rape, I just can't in the absence of evidence.
I just told you they was not in position of power. They was not in a position where they can even say no anything. That was rape. That was rape.
What you're saying is that they couldn't consent because of the slavery aspect. That negates any sort of consent, because either they would have to feel like they would, they had to do this or suffer some sort of repercussions. Or is that what you're saying?
Yeah, possibly death. Yes.
Yeah, they lack what's called informed choice, or the ability to choose. Is that if you're a slave, you actually you're under the threat of punishment at any given time, right? I mean, so are you arguing that because why they're a slave, consent is off the table? You cannot, nobody can actually give consent as long as they're a slave.
The same way if a correctional officer in jail gets caught having sex with a prisoner, even if the prisoner consented to have sex, that's still considered rape, and that correctional officer will lose his job and get pressed up for charges. Mm. And the prisoner could have said, yes, I want to do this, and it doesn't matter.
Well, I get the argument, and it's not nonsensical at all. I will say it's a view of the world, but I'm very careful when it comes to broad strokes about rape, because under this definition, one could make the argument with a similar argument around relationships in the workplace. There's always a boss, and there's always someone being a little higher in the positions than the employee. And by this standard, you could argue that the employee feels extorted systematically, such that all workplace relationships are rape.
I don't necessarily hold that position either, but this is a little bit different than what we're talking about under captivity. But go ahead. Can we move on to the next point?
Yeah, that's a false equivalency. I would say, actually.
How is that a false equivalency? I'm saying that that a similar argument can be made for another system. The thing is, if you are to attribute a rape, there's a victim and someone committing the crime. For me to say a crime occurred, I need a victim. I need someone who says, yeah, I was raped. It's not my impression that all women who have engaged in race mixing in these dates were raped, that they have claimed to be rape victims. And so I'm extremely careful in attributing rape as a third party, without having a victim telling me, yeah, I was raped.
I think what Steve was saying is that, just to clarify that, I think what he's saying is that in the workplace, it's more of a, there's not sort of that, this is my, with slaves, they were considered property. You had ownership of them to a certain extent. In the workplace, it's not like that. You're either on equal footing, but you're both considered people separate from each other. You're not beholden to the person that you work with. So I think the entire point they're saying is that just the slaves felt some sort of, if they didn't go along with this, even, whether they wanted to or not, if they didn't go along with it, there could be horrible repercussions to their physical well-being. And so
in prison, you have color authority, right? You have jurisdiction over a person. They do not have autonomy any longer, right? They're a ward of the state. They are, for all practical purposes, property of the state. Which would, again, like Kyle was saying, in slavery, people are property, right? So there's a false equivalency there, because when you're working for somebody, you're not property of the corporation. There's some equality there. Can people use that authoritative position that they're in to coerce? Yes. That's not rape. That is just, it's unethical, but it's not construed as rape because they don't have the color of authority that they're operating over. Or as Sykopathist was saying, the slave owner has the dominion over their slaves. They are considered property to them.
Well, there are some leftists who want to consider this as a rape. There are some leftists who say if you are under any circumstance of pressure, it is rape. And there is a valid argument to be, if you want to be absolute about the definitions, yes, okay. Everything that in my environment contributes to changing my choice. I don't always feel that all of the options are open. And I feel that if I take some options, I will pay some cost. And what I say is that first, I'm not sure that all slaves were subject to violence.